Thank you very much. Now we are really keeping you from supper. Now your hunger is beginning to become a personal experience, but we're supposed to take some time for questions. Is that right? So I'm going to give you this mic, Donnie, in case anybody has had a good lunch and isn't worried about supper, and I'll stand here and we'll try to do this.
Would you have questions for Dr. Denison?
No one on the front row is allowed to ask any questions. Y'all understand that, don't you? I certainly will, Bill. Thank you. What would have been the difference in the intermediate period between the 1st century and the 21st century? I assume you mean as regards the necessity to be relevant in order to be right? It's a great question. I'll tell you what, Donnie, can I borrow that mic again? I hate standing here. I just don't like standing behind stuff. I don't know why that is. That is a wonderful question. I'll try to do a short answer. My wife would be so proud. I will do my best to try to be brief. In the 1st century context, as I've tried to describe, there is almost a postmodern lack of authority structure. Beyond the necessity to worship the Roman Empire, which was made exempt for the Jews and eventually became the reason for persecution of Christians, apart from that, Rome didn't care what you believed. The empire didn't care who you worshipped. As long as you were loyal to Rome and paid your taxes and didn't rebel, they really didn't care. That's part of the reason they were able to survive as an empire for so long, is that they just assimilated whatever culture might come into existence. Well, so now the church gets out into this larger Greco-Roman world. People start coming into Christianity that don't have any background in the Judeo-Christian worldview. The church begins to be concerned as regards how to preserve theological integrity. No one has printed Bibles, of course. They won't have printed Bibles till Gutenberg, but there's not going to be a written New Testament text that's absolutely available to everybody for many centuries to come. And so the church begins to evolve the idea that the clergy, the called out ones, Cyprian of Carthage, are going to be the authority in the church. The 1% who are gifted to preach and teach will be the leadership of the church, and God will interpret the church through them. This is where the Catholic Church begins to develop its idea that God gave the Bible through the church, so the church is how the Bible's to be interpreted. It's the same way you would approach a medical procedure. I've had knee surgery a couple times. It didn't occur to me to go check out a medical textbook on arthroscopic procedures and try to do that myself. I want someone who's been to medical school to interpret the book and do the procedure. I want Gary Elliston to represent me in a legal matter because he's been to law school and he knows how to interpret the legal codes and the statutes. Well, that was the idea, was that you want people who have been trained by the church and are familiar with the creeds and the dogmas of the church, and so they become the authority structure of the church, and that persists all the way to the Reformation. Eventually, you see the breakup of the Roman Empire and the replacement of that with Christendom, at least in the West. The East is a little different story, but at least in Western Christianity, now it's the traditions of the church that become the authority by which life is to be lived. They are the means by which the Constitution is to be interpreted, we might think, to use another legal analogy. You want those that understand constitutional law. You want those that are lawmakers and understand something about the legal process to be writing the codes by which the Constitution is interpreted. That persists for 1,000 years. You don't have an authority question for 1,000 years. When the Pope speaks ex cathedra from the chair, he is protected by God so that his words are infallible. And the creeds and dogmas of the church are the authority by which life is to be lived. Then, of course, the Reformation. Argues sola scriptura, only scripture, sola fide, only faith. And now you have, in a protestant or a Protestant worldview, the biblical authority as supreme. You have in the Catholic world the Bible as interpreted by the church as supreme. So now you've got two answers to your question. Where is authority to be found? With the Enlightenment, you begin to move into a completely different category. And that's what eventually gets us to Descartes and to empiricists like Locke, Berkeley, and Hume, and to Immanuel Kant, and to the modern era, and now through Nietzsche up to the postmodern rejection of truth. The Enlightenment, I guess, would say human intellect would be truth. The Protestant would say the Bible is truth. The Catholic would say the Bible is interpreted by church. But when the Enlightenment begins, and on the continent, through Kant, begins to question the ability to know the thing in itself, that's when the skepticism of the current culture really begins to find its genesis. Oh boy, that's church history in 10 minutes. Bless your heart, that's a lot more than you wanted to know. But that, I guess in a short version, to boil it down even again, you have the church to the Reformation, you have the church and the Bible after the Reformation, the church, Bible, and human reason in the Enlightenment, and you're still there today. 3 different ways that authority is seen. The culture, of course, is an Enlightenment culture. Not the Bible, not the culture, not the tradition, but unaided reason is where most of the culture is today. Does that help? Oh, thank you, Bill, very much. I see that hand, City Evangelist.
Jim J. Smith, I teach here.
Thank you, Jim.
I love what you have to say today, and I'd like for you to expound on something that I think is important to address at this point. That is, you've described a paradigm shift in epistemology, and that has incredible implications for, I think, how we do theological education today. So my question to you is, how do you envision, if you were to gather all the BBCT school theologians around and say, okay, let's talk about how we do theological education in the postmodern culture to equip our Texas Baptist churches, what would that look like?
Isn't that a good question? Jay is asking, and some of you are beginning to wonder, boy, am I ever going to get to dinner? I'll try to be brief as I can. That's a phenomenal and very practical question. The question was, if you gather together the faculties of our Texas Baptist institutions in the light of this postmodern epistemology, theory of truth, which says there is no such thing as absolute truth, there's just your truth and my truth, what impact might this cultural shift, this paradigm shift have on our teaching methodologies? How would we consider the way in which we have been doing education in the light of the current context? We're far more familiar with the technological revolution. And in classrooms, we're far more familiar with distance learning, with the need to have web-based educational systems, with Facebooks and Twitter and things like that. And I'm grateful that we're trying to use current technology in order to be able to communicate in a medium that the people we're trying to teach understand. An MTV world that never hears anyone stand and talk for 30 minutes except in church. My 2 sons, the oldest is a first semester student at Truett. The youngest is finishing his sophomore year at Ouachita Baptist University in Arkansas and has been called into worship ministry, he thinks. The only time either of them ever in their lives have had to sit there while someone talked without any kind of PowerPoint or any kind of visuals for 30 minutes is when they came to church and had to listen to me preach in their lives. I'm glad we've adopted the technological issues that have occurred, but we are by and large, at least so far as I know what's happening in educational systems, not just in Texas Baptist life, but in the larger context, it's awfully hard for us in a faith-based educational context fully to respond to the epistemological shift, to the worldview shift that's occurred. We don't like it to start with. We don't want to look like we're endorsing a worldview that says there is no such thing as absolute truth. And if you design a curricular strategy around that assumption, it appears to be an endorsement of that assumption. And it sounds as though we're teaching that there is no such thing as absolute truth. You know that to say there is no absolute truth is to make an absolute truth claim. We're back to the ancient skeptics who 3 centuries before Christ said there's no such thing as truth and we're sure of it. You know. I don't think this will hold indefinitely. I think there will come a time when people will look at this current context and it won't be called postmodern and it won't be a permanent thing. I think we're probably in a time between the times, but nonetheless we have the problem of looking as though we're endorsing something if we adjust our strategy around it. That's an issue before us. The second issue that I think is going to make it difficult for us to respond effectively to this worldview is the fact that in many ways we are, as faith-based institutions, the product of, and in some ways supposed to be representing the worldviews of the churches which have founded us and which continue to send their students to us, which fund us on significant levels. And most of our churches don't really know anything of what we've been talking about today. The best guess I would have in terms of what we might want to do is to add some lanes to the freeway. If we're not, and many I'm sure are, but if we're not, embracing the issue that is before us in our curricular strategy, making our students know why they have grown up in a culture that denies absolute truth, objective morality. If we don't explain why they think as they think and where their worldview has come from, if we ignore it so that we can teach the modern worldview based on a top-down kind of authority structure, all the while knowing that they're not living in that world, if we ignore it, we legitimize it. Then they think, well, we just don't get it. I think we, at the very least, explain where their world came from and show them what's wrong with their world. Let's do an apologetic. Let's not ignore this. Let's explain why the postmodern ethos can't hold. Let's explain the damage. Let's explain the inherent philosophical illogic of it. For me to say to you that there is no such thing as objective ethic is only valuable if you wish your ethic to be subjective. Let's say that the cook who prepares your dinner in his own particular worldview thinks that cyanide makes an excellent food additive. Well, that's just his truth. You have no right to tell him what he should or shouldn't believe. If I have no right to force my ethics upon you, then at the end of the day, how do we do law? At the end of the day, who does make these decisions? On the other side of that, now I've gone to preaching, there is enormous value in the postmodern emphasis on relationship. We in the modern world have so bought into institutional Christianity, where we measure success by buildings, budgets, and baptisms, and how many people come to our campuses, and how many people sign up to be part of our churches, that we, I think, ignore the biblical ethos that measures success by disciples, not by attenders. The postmodern relativistic view of truth is relational in its context, and that's all biblical. That's all good. My two sons have very little interest in institutional ministry. They want to be involved in something that makes a difference. My youngest son, when he comes home this summer, wants to work in an inner city ministry, and he doesn't care if he makes any money or not. We care, but he doesn't care. Now, he admits that because we care, he doesn't have to care. He understands that this is not a permanent environment in which he now lives. But nonetheless, he wants this summer to see not how much money he can make, but how many lives he can touch. When I was 20 years old, I promise you, I wasn't thinking like that. I think we have the discussion. I know I'm muddling around in this. It's a tough thing to do. I think we have the discussion. I think we explain where the postmodern mindset comes from. I think we do that not just in a philosophy class that some students may only take if they have to. I think we make that far more central to our curriculum. Everybody thinks that their particular discipline ought to be central to the curriculum. I'm a philosopher, so that's what I think. But I think every college student needs to know why they think the way they think. They need to know what's bad about the postmodern relativism and what's good about postmodern relationality. And then we get the chance to present the rightness of whatever it is we're teaching by its relevance to their lives. Well, that's a good question, Jim. Let's talk about that some more, okay? Something else. I see that hand.
Yeah, I'm Adam Hardy. I'm a freshman here at Payne.
Hey, Adam, how are you?
I'm doing pretty well.
Good.
I have a question going back to the similarities that you drew between now what we see in our culture in America
In the first century. Yes.
Yeah. And I found it very interesting that you said postmodernism won't last, because when you were talking about the first century, it made me start thinking about the book Total Truth by Nancy Pearson.
Yes.
Who was a pupil of Francis Schaeffer.
Yes.
And in there she drew a conclusion based around what you're talking about, that eventually the postmodernist idea would eventually fade away, that even atheism and agnosticism would fade away and be replaced by a more prominent pantheism. And that would be something that would be very, very rampant. And I was trying to figure out what was different between America as we see it today and the first century. And one big thing I thought of was that back then, a lot of what we saw is the church on fire, doing all this, feeding the hungry, and living with each other and for Jesus Christ. And today, at least in America, we don't see nearly as much of that. I was wondering about other differences between the first century and now, and what the ways are we can respond.
Adam, thank you. First of all, you referenced an excellent book by Nancy Pearson. She's done a lot of writing with Chuck Colson over the years, and she's been influenced by Francis Schaeffer over the years, but it really has a great conversation, I think, around what we're talking about right now. about the shifts in culture. And her belief as well, I think most philosophers believe that to deny the existence of truth is to make a truth claim, and that particular worldview is probably not going to be permanent, that there's going to be a shift out of that. That's what she would say. That's what I would say as well. She's suggesting that there will be a pantheism on the other side of this. Panentheism is God is in everything. Pantheism is God is everything. You're starting to see that more and more and more. Spark of the divine in you. Climb the road to your own enlightenment, your own truth, your own personal truth. You're starting to see that on popular daytime television. You're starting to see this as more and more the culture, kind of a pantheism, and then Christianity is just one way to encounter the God that really is you. That's what she thinks, I think, is kind of where we're headed as the next step or the next chapter in the story. What's some of the difference between American 21st century Christianity and first century Christianity? The first is that they were experiencing awakening and we're not. They were experiencing a personal, life-changing, transformative, holistic walk with Jesus. We've made Christianity, as I said before, a religion that you can spend your discretionary time on Sunday observing if you wish. We have made the church consumer-driven. We now want to offer you success without stress. We want to help you with your marriage or your finances or your family, and we should, but we really make that the centerpiece of kind of a pop therapy approach to ministry, in the belief that we can draw you into the process, and from there we can get you to a place where you'll begin to be discipled as a second, third, or fourth step. The problem is a lot of people never take the second step, and in my estimation, it's being inoculated where you get enough of the disease not to get the real thing. You've been to church because you heard a pep talk. I don't know where this recording is going to go, but nonetheless, that's what I think. That's what I think. And so in American Christianity, so much of what passes for church growth is church transference from one denomination to the next or from one church to the next, based on the degree to which we can meet your need, because it's all about you. And it's a consumer-driven approach. You don't find that in the first century, where Jesus said, if any man would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. In a first century context, Paul said, I am crucified with Christ. Nevertheless, I live, yet not I, but Christ lives in me. And the life I live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. A disciple-oriented Christianity is what you're seeing in South Korea, where they get up every morning at 4 o'clock to pray. People go to South Korea to Yoido Full Gospel Church. According to Pastor Cho, they want to copy his cell group strategy. But he says, no one wants to copy my 4 o'clock prayer meeting. The major contrast is between a consumer-driven, institutionally oriented, success by numbers approach to ministry and a first century following Jesus at all cost, sold out, 24/7 discipleship. No other religion separates Sunday and Monday. Muslims pray 5 times a day every day. I've lived in the Muslim world. You've seen that. Buddhists live every day by the 4 Noble Truths and the Eightfold Noble Path. Hindus live all of life by the laws of karma and by the reincarnational worldview. Orthodox Jews live every day by Torah. It's just in Western Christianity that we've separated Sunday and Monday and religion in the real world because of Orpheus to Pythagoras to Plato to Augustine to Luther to us. The major difference, I know it sounds simplistic, is spiritual renewal, spiritual awakening. It's deciding that we want to be sold out again. To be evangelistic, it's what the old evangelist Gypsy Smith said, take a chalk, draw a circle around yourself, pray till everything in the circle is right with God, and revival will come. It's deciding that we want to be sold out again. And the really good news is that when awakenings happen, all 4 of them have either started on college campuses or have gotten there very, very quickly. We're seeing some very good news on college campuses these days. Some very good news. Ron was saying this morning, Ron Cook was saying, where's Ron? Why is it that if whenever we want to quote someone, we have to point at him first? I wonder why that is. Well, nonetheless, there's Ron right there. Said this morning that there are 2,000 students at Baylor that have indicated an interest in being involved in missions as an ongoing lifestyle. 2,000 students. Is that right? That have made that decision. I told Ron that Campus Crusade for Christ has seen a 500% increase at Harvard, a 700% increase at Princeton. Things are happening on college campuses right now that are very, very exciting. God is at work again. I think it's with people who are willing to do whatever God asks, wherever he leads, whatever it costs. Where they're more like them. Chesterton said, it's not that Christianity has been tried and found wanting, it's that it's never been tried. In the first century it was. All over the world today it is. Let's get on the train, would be my thought. Are we out of time? Okay. Thank you for the privilege of being part of this picture today.